Yo, what's going on guys? RURIKHAN'S here, and welcome to a video for Final Fantasy XIV. What? What is this? Okay, so let me explain. This video has a very specific purpose. I need help, basically. A long time ago, I played Final Fantasy XIV. I played it when it first came out, and was very bad. Then I stopped. I then came back and played again, or attempted to play again, in A Realm Reborn. I got to level 50, I made my warrior, and then I stopped. The game just didn't click for me. Now to be clear, this isn't my first rodeo. I've played many MMOs in my time: Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2, World of Warcraft, Aeon, Silk Road Online, Cabal Online, the list goes on. However, it has become increasingly more evident that Final Fantasy XIV is not like other MMOs, and in my attempt to play it like other MMOs, I've kind of ruined my experience. I've skipped cutscenes, I've ignored all dialogue, and I have attempted to rush through content as a means to get to the end, and it didn't work. Recently, however, Soxy Bear on the team has played it for the very first time. It is his first MMO experience, he's leveling a ninja, and he is having the time of his life. His excitement has been infectious, so much so that it made me download the game and try again, making this my third attempt to get into Final Fantasy XIV. I really wanted to click because I love MMOs and I have so many friends that play this game, so I really want to like it. So we're gonna try again. But I've got questions. So in order to try and bring me up to speed, I called in some expert help, and none other than the legendary RURIKHAN. How's it going, man?
I'm doing good. We just did a couple of dungeons just now in Final Fantasy XIV. That was fun.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I'm starting to kind of get back into it. We're slowly. But basically, for any of you guys, of course, that haven't already done so, make sure you check out RURIKHAN'S channel down below. He knows tons of stuff about, you obviously know for like Monster Hunter, Soulsborne, but also he's a massive Final Fantasy XIV fan, knows a ton about the game. Just the other day released a fantastic tank guide. So if you guys, like me, want to know more about tank, I'm going to link that down below. He's going to be your place to be for Endwalker, basically. But basically, right, so I spoke to you about this the other day, but as I kind of said in the intro, I have had quite possibly the worst experience. I've ruined my experience. When I told you this, but for everyone else, when I skipped the cutscenes, when I turned the music off, when I paid no attention to the story, you were just like, what have you done?
It's like, but it's understandable that you do that and that people do that, because I feel like a lot of people came over from World of Warcraft, and World of Warcraft kind of formats your brain in a certain way where it's like, the only thing that matters is the last expansion. Everything before it doesn't actually matter. All that matters is the end game and whatnot. It just kind of formats you that way. And in Final Fantasy XIV, it's a much different experience because the content doesn't actually expire. Like you saw, we both queued for like a level 50 dungeon that probably came out in, I don't know, patch 2.2 or 2.1. And it was like instant queue. We were able to instantly find 2 other people to come do the dungeon with us.
True, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely learning that. So for anyone that's kind of watching this video, the main kind of focus here is that like I have had a very distorted experience of Final Fantasy. So I've got some very specific questions for the kind of player that I am in the attempt to try and repair my Final Fantasy experience and bring me back. So question number 1, obviously, is that I finished playing as a level 50 warrior the last time I tried to play, which was some 2-3 years ago now. I stopped before the end of Realm Reborn, and I'm sure other people might have done this before. So the question would be, what would be the best experience to kind of pick up where I left off? Let's assume I jump back in and I'm like, all right, I've got a level 50 character. I forgot all my buttons. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the quests are. I don't remember my keybinds. I don't remember anything. So the question is, if someone does that, what's the best way to jump back in? Should it be level a new job and just kind of refresh your memory? Or should it be pick up with your character, relearn a few things, and carry on? What would you do?
I mean, it just depends on what is your current motivation at the time, because one of the advantages that you have with 14 is like, you can swap to any job whenever you want. So it's like, if you're jumping back in and you're like, I really want to do like a different job, then just get that different job and level it up. There's plenty of ways to level up, whether it is through doing fates, whether it is through doing lev quests or dungeons or whatever. But if you want to jump back into your old character, like is your case, you wanted to jump back into your warrior, then I would just like look up a YouTube video on a refresher to kind of just like get the basics of your rotation again, which is essentially what we did in that like call that we did the day that you came back, and you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with my buttons. It's like there's plenty of videos that go over the rotations and stuff like that. But even if you don't want to watch a video, if you just like read through the tooltips, the game is actually very good about, the very first ability that you have on your thing is usually the first ability that you cast whenever you're doing combat. And then the next ability will highlight. It will tell you, okay, this is the next ability that you should do. So just press the buttons that are highlighted and then just jump back in and start doing quests again. Just go to the upper left-hand side if you haven't messed with your basic UI, and that should tell you, hey, here's what your main story quest is. Jump back in and try to understand at which point of the story you were in. And if you don't remember it, then just look for, the beginning part of the story, because there's plenty of websites that also have summaries and stuff like that. And just try to jump back in and try to understand where you were in the story and where you're going to, and just keep moving forward. Because ultimately what matters is just getting that momentum and continuing to play, and eventually everything else just sorts itself out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so that's one of the things that I've been trying to get with the motivation at the moment. I've been I came back and we know that I'm someone that typically likes to play tank, but when I have returned, I've returned with what I've called tank-anxiety, right? I go to queue up and I'm just like, what if I mess up? What if I don't hold aggro? What if this goes wrong? So my question is, have I specifically, or if someone is like me, if I'm coming back and I'm like, I want to tank, have I chosen a good place to maybe return? Have I set myself up for failure? If someone is coming back, would you say, yo, tank is a good place to jump in? Go DPS? What do you think would be a good place for someone to return to?
I think that ultimately the thing that matters the most is what is the class fantasy that you like the most. I don't really go about it through roles. Like in my case, I happen to like doing tanking the most, but at the same time, the tank classes also have the fantasy that I like the most. So everything just kind of lines up. But if I wanted to say, play a machinist, which is another class fantasy that I kind of like, I would just play that instead if I like playing machinist more. And instead of tanking that, I would deal damage. So ultimately what matters is picking the job. It's called job in 14. It's not really called class, but it's the same thing. Class, job. But picking the job that you like the most. And one of the ways of figuring out which one that is there's an actual trailer that they always do ahead of each expansion, which is just job action. So if you look, for instance, Endwalker job actions on YouTube, you'll find the official video where they show you what each job looks like when they're playing, and you get an idea, oh, that looks cool, that's the job that I want to play. And you kind of work towards that job. But I wouldn't select a specific role. It's more about what do you think you're going to like? Do you think you're going to like to heal? Then go ahead, pick up a white mage or an astro or even the sage that's going to be a healer with Gundam guns and whatnot. So that's
cool.
It is pretty cool. If you like the idea of playing the Reaper, then pick up the Reaper when Endwalker comes out. But you still have to kind of level up to 70 to get to those jobs. But you get the idea. Jumping back in is always about just choosing the class that you think is more appealing to you. Now, if you were to ask me which role do I think is the hardest, I'm going to have an answer that most people are going to disagree with, but to me, I think tanking is the easiest job, healer is the second easiest job, and DPS is actually the hardest job because they have to deal with the mechanics and they have to deal with their rotation, and DPSers often have the more complex rotations. And at the same time, they have to be able to perform their rotation while dealing with the mechanics, which in my opinion, I think is the hardest thing to do in the game.
That's fair enough, yeah, because obviously, for anyone that obviously didn't know, I came back initially because Socks had been playing a lot. He got super excited with the ninja. I wanted to play the ninja. It didn't work out. Basically, I feel like you're right. I think I'm in the right place. I'm a meathead. I like just being the tank, the strong guy. I just want to sit there and not die. So that's fair. But that brings me on to my next point then. So obviously one of the dilemmas I had this week was, there is the opportunity to skip. So to skip or not skip. Obviously I was sitting there and I came back at first and I was trying to get into it. And obviously I stopped at the end of The Realm Reborn. And you mentioned that I do have the kind of big, slow, grindy quest chunk. So the one question I had at this point was should I pay the skip and jump into Heaven's Wood so I can play with my friends, for example? Or is it worth just kind of saying, I'm going to deal with this, slog through it, and get there? What do you think would be... It's obviously, I know you didn't skip, so I'm just trying to think. If someone is in this position, they're I want to play with my friends. To skip or not to skip, basically.
I mean, the skipping question is always hard because I don't necessarily take a hard stance like you can't skip. If you skip, you're going to ruin it. I advise people not to skip because what I've noticed is that most of the people that do skip, they don't form an attachment to like the world and the characters, and they're just like, oh, I just want to skip and get the end game and do whatever the fun stuff is. But the problem is, for instance, if you skip the Heaven's Word, and I'm not going to give people any story spoilers, but the lead up to Heaven's Word is extremely important for you to understand why Heaven's Word is so impactful. And if you skip that lead up into Heaven's Word, you know, you're still going to get, the story's still good, but you're going to be missing a lot of context as to why things are happening in the way that they're happening, and you're definitely not going to have as good of an experience, including if you skip to like Shadowbringers. Again, Shadowbringers, amazing story. It's, in my opinion, it's the best Final Fantasy game out there, the story of Shadowbringers, but the build-up that you get before it with Stormblood and with Heaven's Word and with Realm Reborn, that is what creates those really like impactful moments when stuff happens where certain characters are affected. It's like, these are the characters that I've been playing with since Realm Reborn. Like, these are, we've been in this journey together, and now these things are happening that they're having to deal with, and it's very, very impactful. So it's like, if you skip, I mean, some players, they just don't like the story, right? And you can skip and maybe you'll enjoy the mechanics and whatnot. There's examples of that in the community of players that have skipped and they enjoy the game for what it is. They still love doing raids and ultimates and all of these things, but they skip the story. Some of those go back and they do the story again in New Game Plus because the game actually gives you the opportunity to do the story again. You can, even if you skip, there's an option there that is New Game Plus and you can just like experience the story all over again. But a majority of players that end up sticking with the game are usually players that don't skip the story and actually enjoy it at its own pace. Like, to give you an idea, when I started playing again, because I've failed once as well to stick with Final Fantasy XIV, but when I started playing again was 2019, right around the time that Shadowbringers released. And when Shadowbringers released, I was playing through Realm Reborn. And throughout the Shadowbringers hype, I was going Realm Reborn, Heaven's Word, Stormblood. By the time I actually got the Shadowbringers, they were in patch 5.2. So it's only 2 patches into Shadowbringers is when I eventually got there. And I would definitely say my experience was way better than if I had just skipped the Shadowbringers to go to the end game.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Because that brings me kind of onto the next question, which obviously is that, unfortunately, the sin that it is, I skipped every cutscene. So as we kind of jump back in, I currently have 0 investment. However, I have learned, obviously from speaking to you and everyone else who's involved, that while it isn't the only way to play the game, Final Fantasy XIV versus other MMOs, definitely the story is, of course, a huge component. So for someone that did that, if I have missed all the narrative and stuff like that, what would you recommend as a means to pull me back in? Like, should I be watching a story recap? Like, how would you repair the damage that I've done, basically?
I would definitely watch a story recap because particularly if you skip the cutscenes and you already have like a level 50 character, I feel like it's going to be very demotivating for you to just go like, oh, I'm going to start the game fresh again and go through all of these quests. And then you're going to start remembering, oh, I remember when I did this quest and I remember when I did this thing. And it's going to be kind of like a frustrating experience. So it's like the Realm Reborn stuff is important, but at the same time, Realm Reborn stuff is maybe, you know, it's like the world building of it. So it's kind of, it sets a foundation. So it's important to know the story, but I also don't remember a lot of the events that happen in Realm Reborn because it's so much to like keep track of, right? But I know that when something happens in the story, I'll remember, oh, this is because it's connected to that thing that happened back in Realm Reborn. So watching a story recap is what I would do. In your specific case, because you're about to go into the post-patch quests, I'd either watch or read a recap of 2.0, which is basically the content bit that you kind of like skipped and jumbled through. But you have somewhat of an idea at this point because you've done like Castrum and Praetorium and you know about the Asians and all of these other players in the story, so you'll have an understanding. But watching a recap would be my recommendation. There's plenty of them out on YouTube as well as even like in websites and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fair enough. So with that being said, assuming I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, I'm going to recap. I've decided my class fantasy. I'm going to jump back in. If I want to try and have the most streamlined experience possible, because when I first came back, my quest log was full. I had side quests, main quests. What should I be doing?
So that again goes back to that World of Warcraft mentality where it kind of like taught a lot of players to basically go into a town hub, right? Into a quest hub, pick up all the quests, and then just like look at everything on the map and then complete everything, come back, turn everything in, and do it all over again until you run out of quests. That, in my opinion, is the worst way that you can play Final Fantasy XIV. Like, you can do it if you're enjoying it, go wild, but like my recommendation is look to the top left-hand side of the screen. That is usually where your main story quest is, and that is what you want to focus on. You want to focus on doing your main story quest. Every single time that there's a quest in there, go and do that one. Then every now and then there's a quest that pops up below it. That will be like your job quest. Do that one as well. And just focus on doing those. And every now and then if you run into like these blue quests that have that icon that I showed you, you grab those as well because those will unlock things like additional dungeons or additional features, like you might find something like a Palace of the Dead. Like that is that is like a separate thing from the main story, but it's also a really fun activity to do in the game because at the end of the day, you know, due to the fact that during Realm Reborn there's a lot of cutscenes that are actually not voiced, you're going to get burned out if you're just like cutscene. So it's like, it's important, just take a break, do something else for a little bit, like go do Palace of the Dead or go do a dungeon, go grind tomestones to get better gear, something like that. Do some of those more MMO things in between. And then when you feel like jumping back into the story, jump back in and do more MSQ. Particularly for you, because you're about to go into like 5 patches of story quests that are not the most exciting ones, but they're setting a very important foundation though.
Okay, that makes sense.
That sounds diversifying is what I would say. But just like I would avoid side quests at all costs though. So like just the regular side quests, I wouldn't do a single one of them at this point. Particularly if you're getting back in. Like eventually you can look up some of the more important side quests, like Hildebrand is going to be something that you'll want to do at some point. Hildebrand's an extremely important quest line. And a couple of others like your job quests, obviously do those, but yeah, just like pick and choose as opposed to just like, no, do everything, complete everything.
Yeah,
like,
I think that's the thing. Yeah, that was the daunting thing that kind of like kept me like, oh no, what do I do? So that's good. So focus on the main things and the special unlocks.
Like, let me tell you guys right now, if you look at my map in Final Fantasy XIV in certain areas, it's just like chock full of quests that I didn't do. But I did all the story. But it's just, there's still like all of these quests there. And eventually I'll go back and do those. But those are side quests. They're not nearly as important.
No, that's fair. Okay, cool. So the very last question then, knowing the kind of player that I am, knowing the kind of like, you know, the characters that or the kind of classes that I like to play or jobs, knowing that of course my heritage for MMOs is definitely much more World of Warcraft and stuff. Outside of the story, what do you think moving forward? Let's say it finally clicks with me and I'm moving forward. What do you think are some of the things that are going to hook me in? Like, what are some of the big beats that you're like, these things are going to be like to look forward to?
I mean, one of the things that I think will, coming from World of Warcraft, I don't know whether or not the story is going to hook you because it's a very different story. It definitely hooked me, and it hooks a lot of people just like experiencing the story itself. But I would say that just trials and raids are extremely fun because one of the cool things about this game is that it's very good if you don't skip, because you're going to be introduced to these mechanics at like intervals, and they'll introduce you to the mechanics of raiding as you are doing dungeons. So like they'll teach you what a stack marker is so that you don't run away with it and you're actually supposed to stack everybody up to share damage. They'll teach you how the telegraphs work and all of this stuff. And then the interesting part is like you're able to do normal dungeons with a pug. I mean normal raids with a pug. It's not like in World of Warcraft you have like LFR, which is a complete it's insane. It's a mess. Everybody's just like, do everything, and everybody starts dropping like flies. In 14, players are actually pretty decent at raiding because the game does a good job at teaching players how to raid. So like you can actually experience the entirety of the content, and you never really have that stress of like, oh my god, I would love to do the raid, but then I have to deal with other people and I have to do all this. It's like in this game you can actually just queue for a normal raid and you'll just go in and do the raid, and even if you wipe, it's not a big problem. As a matter of fact, if you're like getting back into the game or if you're a new player, never be scared to tell people that you're doing a dungeon for the first time, because people are very understanding. At least for the most part, the community is very understanding. They'll give you tips. They'll tell you, hey, you should try out this thing. You should try doing that. You should try they'll give you tips and stuff, and very rarely will you see people like rage quit and go, "Oh my God, noob, uninstalled the game." Like that just doesn't happen in most situations in Final Fantasy XIV. So yeah. And then it's like, if you're someone who's more hardcore, then be aware that there's also the extreme trials, savage raids, and ultimate raids, and those require all of that same dedication that you would require for like heroic and mythic raiding and World of Warcraft. And those challenges are there. And in my opinion, I think they're more challenging than some of the stuff that you experience in World of Warcraft, but that's one man's opinion.
Yeah. Oh, fair enough. I mean, that does sound good, because that's the stuff that I mainly used to enjoy in the previous games. So, interesting. Well, thank you very much. That has answered some of my questions. Hopefully, for any of you guys that are maybe watching, if you guys have maybe had a similar experience to me, maybe you are still trying to get back in, then hopefully that's kind of giving you a few things to think about. Again, if you guys want to know more about the game, make sure you check out RURIKHAN'S channel, because of course he's got plenty of videos, and we'll have more videos, of course, with Endwalker coming out. You're going to be very busy. Yeah. So yeah, thank you very much as well for helping. Thank you for teaching me and skilling me back up and getting me back tanking. I appreciate that. And,
if there's one more thing that I would say to people is, I know that it's, everybody's hyped up about Endwalker. I would avoid rushing through the Endwalker. Like, really just take your time with Realm Reborn, Heavensward, because like I said, the content doesn't expire. Like, there's gonna be people running Heavensward dungeons and Heavensward raids and Stormblood dungeons and raids and so on. There's gonna be people running this content. So there's no need for like, oh no, I gotta get to where everybody's doing things, because this is just a different game. Things don't work like that here. You can really just take your time, and by the time you get to Endwalker, people are still gonna be doing stuff in Endwalker. Don't worry about it. It's guaranteed.
Yeah, true. Well, there we have it. I'll take my time, enjoy it. I want to play casually over Christmas, have some fun, and hopefully, third time's a charm. Maybe I might actually finally be into the game this time. So report back soon, and we'll keep you guys posted. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to catch more from us, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our latest uploads. And if you want somewhere to hang out, play games, or chat all things from games to anime, food to fitness, consider joining the RX Gaming Discord.